Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone Season 5, Episode 6. It's called The Living Doll. So spoilers for the episode as always. Premise for this one's quite simple. A mother buys her young daughter a doll, and the stepfather's not too pleased about this for money reasons, and some underlying issues that the episode kind of pokes at and gets into. But the doll, of course, starts saying things that it's clearly not programmed to say to the stepdad, and becomes this kind of thing that's haunting the stepdad over the course of the episode. So that's the basic gist of it. The first thing I'll say is that I couldn't help but notice that the mother in this episode's name is Annabelle. I feel like there's a connection here. Probably just as simple as when they were creating the Annabelle doll in The Conjuring. They named it after this character from this episode because it's a fairly famous episode. Alternatively, if the Annabelle doll was based on a real doll, then maybe this character was named after the real doll, possibly. But either way, there's no way this is just a coincidence that the mother in this episode has the name Annabelle, given that we now hear Annabelle and think of the doll from the Conjuring universe. Mostly bad spin-off movies, to be honest, but her appearance in the first Conjuring was perfectly fine, perfectly entertaining. So get that out of the way. I think the big thing with this episode is that it's very much about the family drama. It's very much about the stepdad who is grumpy, who's angry constantly, who's frustrated about the wife spending money, things like that. But the real, and which made me assume early on that they've got financial troubles. Although, to be honest, as the episode went on, it didn't really feel like that factored into it that much. Maybe they are, maybe they're not really, and he's just being tight, effectively. But what did stick out as the episode went on was that the daughter feels rejected by the stepfather, and the stepfather has these insecurities about being a stepfather, and it seems to stem largely from the fact that we find out that he can't have kids with his wife, and that's something that he thinks that she holds against him, that she can't have more children with him, and presumably because she had a kid before him, it's probably on his end where the problem lies. This is this thing that's eating at him, and he thinks the wife holds against him. He thinks that both her and the daughter hate him, and he acts out. He is very aggressive about it. So it's very much a character study of a very unpleasant person and why they're unpleasant and what really is making them tick. And I kind of took the doll starting to talk to him and say things like, "I hate you," and then the big cliffhanger before the ad break is the doll phoning him and saying, "I'm going to kill you." It was that he effectively was convinced of this problem in his life, this idea that his wife hates him for not being able to have more kids. But it's kind of just him manifesting that. It's not real. So the doll to me, and the doll speaking to him and coming after him, is very much just another kind of like a more extreme version of like, okay, well, if he can manifest that, which is a very like sort of mundane but very dramatic thing, then the Twilight Zone's going to extend it to something fantastical. So now he's going to see a doll talking to him and saying things that it shouldn't be saying. It's worth mentioning the doll doesn't like move around on its own, like on camera. We don't do the thing where the lights turn off and then they turn back on and the doll's moved across the room. It doesn't do that, actually. That's something I think we all associate with stories about dolls that are creepy or move around when we're not looking and that kind of thing. This doll, well, there's definitely probably some moving between scenes, probably because there has to be for the story to make sense. It's not something that it focuses on as a way of creating horror or tension. It's mostly through the things that it says to the stepdad and him getting more and more frustrated and agitated and confrontational with the doll. And obviously the whole time to Annabelle, the mum, it just looks like he's becoming unhinged and is putting more issues between him and the rest of the family. Now, that's not to say that I'm saying that the doll isn't really alive, because the ending actually kind of says that she probably is, because at the very end of the episode, when he does die, when the doll is sitting on the stairs to trip him up and he falls to his death, the doll does say something to the mum, says, "You better be nice to me." So that would imply that the doll is really alive in some form, and it isn't just like a conjured, no pun intended, thing in his head. That said, though, I think you can kind of read it as a analogy for that kind of thing, and the idea that this belief that someone hates him, and belief that he's got this disconnect from his family is ultimately going to end the marriage. It's ultimately going to destroy him, destroy the marriage. I think that's kind of something that's definitely there. I think you could also maybe, if you don't want to go down that route with analysing this episode, you can maybe say something along the lines of, it's a manifestation of what the daughter's feeling, because the daughter feels rejected and hated by her stepdad. So it's almost like this doll becomes a vengeful guardian to look out for her and defend her against this horrible father. I think that interpretation works as well. There's definitely some open things here. I think the reason why an episode like this works so well is because even without analysing anything and just enjoying it for the thrills, you get a lot out of it. You get a lot of the creepy moments. You get this really unlikable character who's really smug about throwing the doll away. He's convinced that the wife is playing tricks on him, and she's put like a walkie-talkie inside the doll to talk to him, and that it's all some big joke to get back at him for not being able to have kids, which would be a really cruel thing to do if someone actually did that to someone who couldn't have kids, would be to give them comeuppance for it like it's their fault, which is just to say how delusional he really is and how insecure he is about this. And then from there, you have the actual threat, because he throws her in the trash, and he's really smug about it. When the wife and daughter are looking for the doll, and he says he doesn't know anything, he's got such a shit-eating grin on his face. And then it's after this where the phone rings, and it's the doll saying, "I'm going to come and kill you," which I almost called the doll Annabelle there, just out of sheer habit or whatever. The doll's actually called Talkie Tina, is the name of the doll, which is easy to remember. It's a memorable name. I'll give it that. But yeah, it's those creepy vibes, and then there is some other supernatural elements that come into it, which is the doll does react to pain. Interestingly, she says "ow" when he does something early on, but in the back half of the episode, when the doll shows up after, because it's missing and it's not in the trash anymore, he goes to check after the death threat. He ends up finding it in the daughter's bed with her, so he assumes the daughter got it out of the trash. Obviously, I don't think that. I don't think the audience in general thinks that. The audience thinks the doll made its own way somewhere for the daughter to find it in a more sensible place, I would assume. But he takes the doll and goes down to the garage, and he's got a full suite of power tools down there, and he tries to put the head in a vase and crush it. That doesn't work. He tries to... I can't remember what the second thing it was, but the third thing he does is he takes it over to the table saw, the buzz saw, and he tries to saw its head off. And he keeps trying, and it just doesn't. Like, his sparks are flying, but when he takes the doll back up, there's barely a scratch on it. Oh, it was a blowtorch, that's what it was. Because the blowtorch basically just kept going out. Like, it almost was setting her on fire, but the torch would just keep going out every time it got close. And that kind of felt like there was like a mystical force stopping it. It was beyond just the doll's alive. There's also just supernatural aura around the doll at that point, which... I don't know if that's something that the writer of this episode necessarily was trying to say much about. I don't think this was an intent to try and expand the mythology of this. I suspect this was more a practical reason, that they can have a saw hit like something that looks like it's hitting the doll, but it's actually hitting like a little metal block or something in front of the doll. It can have the vise look like he's trying to tighten it, but it's not really tightening. The torch, though, is kind of, I imagine they probably considered, can we set it on fire and then have it look okay afterwards? And the answer to that was probably just have lots of duplicates, and maybe that wasn't just something they wanted to get. They didn't want to spend that much money on them or something. I don't know how much one of these dolls would have even cost. I imagine it was custom, though. I don't imagine this was just a doll they went out and got at the store just for legal reasons, and unless they had some sort of product placement. That said, though, I don't imagine any toy company would have felt comfortable with their toy that they're actually trying to sell to kids being used in a story where the doll murders a man. I feel like they probably wouldn't enjoy that very much. So probably not, but it's a fun little sequence though. And then his plan at the end of this is to just wrap it up in like a potato sack and tie it shut. And he puts it in the trash. He puts like some cylinder blocks on top. At this point, he's very upset about it. But when he goes upstairs, because the wife saw him trying to cut the head off, she's packing. She's like, okay, he's lost his mind. And this is, again, what brings it back into the analogy of it's all about how he's treating his family and that family relationship that's fallen apart, is that the wife sees all this as him just not accepting her or her daughter, that he's never going to actually be a family with them. He's always going to be this other who's fighting against him. Because he's not tried very hard this episode to even pretend that. There's like one moment after the first time he gets mad that the wife bought a doll because they shouldn't be spending money. And he yells at the daughter, and the daughter runs away. After that, he does apologize and says it's all his fault, and he seems sweet to the kid for like maybe 10 seconds. But then we go to the dinner scene afterwards, and then it just kind of starts to bubble up again quite quickly. But I think this episode works really well because it is this combination of the thrills of the creepy doll, the satisfaction of a pretty unlikable character getting more and more worried, and then seeing consequences for his actions, and that's the wife wanting to leave him, which he actually chickens out of and goes and gets the doll and gives it back to the daughter, thinking that'll keep the marriage in place. Like that's just him trying to save his marriage. He's like, okay, I realized that I was going to piss her off, so I'm like, I have to chicken out of this, which he does, and then the doll says, I don't forgive you, and then that night he takes a stumble down the stairs. And that's your big ending to the episode, which is fun. But you get that satisfaction, and then on top of that, there are layers to it because it's really about this character who is insecure and is how he's treating the other people in his life, his family, and he's alienating his stepdaughter and his wife, and it's all about this rift between them, and that's what the doll represents, and it's kind of, much like the Twilight Zone often does, it's a manifestation of what he's putting out into the world coming back to get him. It's almost a Tales from the Crypt episode, actually. One, because it's more of a horror story, but also just because it is someone getting comeuppance for the way they are, and that's a very Tales from the Crypt style plot. Not that I'm saying it doesn't belong in Twilight Zone, it absolutely does. Twilight Zone's done horror before, it'll do horror again. But just particularly the idea of someone getting comeuppance, it makes me think of Tales from the Crypt, because pretty much every episode of Tales from the Crypt is someone getting comeuppance. So, no, really fun time. And I think the performance from Telly Savalas is pretty good. He really makes the episode, given that he's the one who has to react to the doll, he's the one who has to get more agitated as the episode goes on, he's the one who has to really sell all of this. And like I said, he's not just selling the creepy doll, he's actually performing all of these insecurities that he has about his life and his family, and how he feels, I don't know if emasculated is quite the right word, but certainly insecure about all this stuff. But no, maybe emasculation does actually fit, because if it is about him not being able to, if it's about him firing blanks effectively, and he feels emasculated about that, it's him then taking that out on the others around him, and then gaslighting them into thinking they're the ones who hate him for it, or at least that's what he's trying to do. He's convinced they hate him for it, but he's really just taking out his own insecurities out on them. It's actually a slightly more complex role than maybe it would appear at face value, and I think he does a good job. The actress who plays Annabelle's fine, the kid's fine, but it's really his episode to shine and do all that stuff. And yeah, so fun premise, fun conclusion. It's got the layers. I think it does a decent job of building to him believing that it's actually a threat, and it's this kind of obsessive thing. But again, the idea that his family think he's obsessing over something that's not real ties into the fact that he was already obsessing over something that wasn't real, in this idea that his wife hates him for not being able to have more kids. And to the point where he even accuses her of buying the doll because, well, the daughter can't have a brother and sister, so you had to buy her a doll to remind me that I couldn't give her a brother or sister. And the wife's like, no, I didn't really think about that. And I believe her because, kids get toys. Girls often get dolls. It's a pretty normal thing to give a kid. It's really not an FU to your spouse to buy a doll, unless there's a specific setup for it where where you're trying to piss them off because they don't want you to. It's really not the case. And they do a good job setting up, actually. I actually really appreciate at the start of the episode that we see them with their packages, and the daughter's got the doll in a box, right? She's not opened it yet. And they're arriving home outside. And most of the show takes place inside the house, but there's just one little scene at the start when they're arriving before they come in. And I actually quite like this, that I'm thinking about it, because the mum's saying to the daughter, don't tell your dad about the doll just yet, just go upstairs. Like, I think that's a pretty good little tease. It kind of tells you that he's going to be mad about it, but you're not really sure why yet. You're not really sure what the context is, but it gives you just this tease of what type of person he is. So then when you come in and he immediately clocks, wait a minute, what's that box? What's in there? Tell me now. And the wife tries to talk him down and say, no, like, it's fine, it's not nothing, just the doll, nothing important. And he gets the way he gets. It's sort of like this sort of payoff to what was just teased prior. So I actually think that's a good little introduction before you see him. He's definitely the prominent main character of the story, but he's the last character we actually meet in the story. Well, actually, that's not. If you count the doll, that's not true. The doll's the last one we actually meet. But out of the humans, he's the last one we meet. And they build him up a little bit before you get to see him. And I think that's just a smart little bit of storytelling. It's very economical, right? It's only a 25-minute show, but they found a way to build to the main character just a little bit before we actually meet him. And I think that's a good use of their time. So 60 seconds well spent at the start. So, very cool. That is The Living Doll, which was episode 6 of season 5. Let's see what we're getting next time from Twilight Zone. Next time, we're getting The Old Man in the Cave, which Rod Serling did tell us about at the end of this one. Here's the description on IMDb. In post-apocalyptic settlement in 1974, yeah, because that's like a decade out of the future. And I always need to remember that whenever they mention something about the future and then they say it's the 70s. The inhabitants' survival depended on the advice of an unseen man living in a nearby cave. This dependence is tested when a band of soldiers descends on their town. This is interesting, actually. James Corburn's in this episode, who I saw recently in a movie called Charade, which I really like that movie. It's a fantastic movie. Now, this is an interesting premise. Obviously, you've got the post-apocalyptic side, but the idea that there's someone in a cave who's effectively telling all these people how to survive and live, but it's obviously a mystery who they are, or possibly what they are. Is it even a man? They obviously think it's a man. I'm not convinced it's a man based on this description. This feels like this is prime for a big reveal at the end of the episode. But then this idea that they're challenged because outsiders come in and question who they're taking advice from. I like the sound of this. This sounds like a very intriguing episode with a mystery. I'm on board for this one. I mean, I was going to watch it anyway. I'm working through the show, but excitement-wise, I'm on board. So I'll see you next week for The Old Man in the Cave. But let me know what you thought of The Living Doll in the comments below. You can like, subscribe, all those things help out a lot, and more people will find the show and the channel if you do, so please hit the buttons. And of course, you can support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble, including, as far as TV reviews goes, a monthly review of Columbo, which I'm 3 episodes into. I'm enjoying that quite a bit and talking about it every month. That's a Patreon and YouTube member exclusive. So if you want to support the shows and get something extra, you can do that. Plus, there's a bunch of extras for all the movie content over at MailFuzz Movies. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.